Hello, and welcome to the Mind Renovation Nation show, brought to you by Red Maples, your go-to source for institutional-style property management of small multifamily rentals. I'm your host, Nathan Bush, and each show I share with you real-life lessons I've learned from growing my real estate business. Guys, imagine transforming the construction landscape and elevating the standards of every project you touch. Today on Building Beyond Expectations, we're unraveling the innovative strategies that are setting new benchmarks in construction quality. Yeah, that's a tongue twister, and I put that all together just for my guest. Stay with us, because Jake Little, we call him Big Jake Little, a trailblazer in the construction industry, innovates us, and he's going to tackle some of the toughest challenges in the industry and reveal how you can overcome some of them, not just to meet Jake, but to understand how to use the information within your business, whether you're a seasoned investor or a newcomer. You know, we're extremely eager for you to make your mark, and we wouldn't want you to miss this deep dive into construction excellence. And we've designed this show to answer the questions you have about growing your revenue in your real estate business. So you want to stay tuned and hang on, because I got a great guest for you with Big Jake Little. If you want more of these types of resources regularly, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel or head on over to www.nathanbushmba.com/subscribe and check out the other resources in the show descriptions. Guys, I encourage you today, if you're watching online live, I encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the day, go ahead and put them in the chat. That way, Big Jake Little and I can answer any questions that you have as we're ripping all on construction quality. You know, I'd be remiss, though, if I didn't take a second to thank Red Maples, our sponsor of the show and what makes all this possible for you. Go to red-maples.com/assessment if you have a rental portfolio and you'd like an assessment of what's going on. Maybe you're not making as much money as you believe you should, or maybe you're overpaying for services and just don't know it. Go to red-maples.com/assessment and we can help you with all of that. On today's show, I want to frame this entire show and have the conversation around this concept, because construction matters, especially in real estate and real estate investing. Construction matters. And the concept I want to frame today's show around is this quote from Jim Collins. In his book, Good to Great, he said, "Greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline." And today's guest, Big Jake Little, is a steward of that philosophy. Jake is a roofing contractor known as Jake from State Farm due to his knowledge of insurance and financials. He's on track for the third year exceeding $1 million in construction sales, and he's a fitness enthusiast and deep thinker on topics of history and architecture. We're going to try to explore all of that with Jake today in about the next 25, 35 minutes. So we got a jam-packed show with lots of information to cover with you. He goes to the job site not just to make the sale, but to change the customer's life and to preserve the housing stock of Missouri. And I'd like to take a warm welcome. If you guys are in the chat and you know Jake, go ahead and say hi. Let's bring Jake up. How are you, Jake? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about thyself?
Know thyself. That's one of the greatest quotes in all of history, huh?
There's a concept of closing the deal in the first minute, such as, let's say you show up and the adjuster also has a buzz cut. I say, looks like we both got the memo. That's a favorite for USAA claims because it's a military cut. 1924 in University City, 100-year-old house this year, getting a new roof. I saw the adjuster and I said, "Oh, I'm doing well. How about thyself?" He said, "Thyself? You caught me off guard." I said, "Well, it's a fancy house, so I use fancy language." And at that point, he can't not approve it.
I love it. I love it. Jake, you know, I wanted to have a conversation with you because your guys' organization does such a good job, but there's so many bad contractors out there. And on the screen, and if you're listening to the audible replay, there's a passed out contractor. He's got a beer bottle there on all the material, just not doing what he's supposed to. And there's another contractor photo I have on here of somebody trying to use a circular saw on the back of another gentleman. These things, I pulled the pictures so I could share a little bit of levity about the situation, but this isn't too far from the truth with a lot of bad contractors out there, is it?
I have a perspective, and I've heard a lot of stories about, oh, the last guy did this and skipped town, or other instances of poor work that was done in the house, or decent work that didn't have any follow-up or follow through. I have a little saying that labor isn't picked off of a shelf. So if a homeowner is aware of a contractor, at least somebody has had a good experience with that person, or that person's done enough work to make a living out of it. So sometimes the relationship can go awry. A lot of people will say, oh, roofer isn't calling me back. Well, there are some situations where the house can be distressed in such a fashion where there's other trades that are involved, and it's not just roofing that would be done, or there's the money situation is not really matching the scope of work that the contractor is suggesting. Obviously, there's a lot of vice that can be a problem in a lot of industries. I think it kind of makes itself manifest when physical labor is at stake, because if someone's besmirching their physical health with, drugs and alcohol and things like that, it is more difficult to be consistent and then deliver the quality of the job. That's why that's one of many reasons that I'm a health enthusiast, and that I try to set myself apart, based on my energy level and clarity that I experience. But the person doing work that did a bad job for somebody may as well have done a good job for a family member. And so it really can be about making sure that contractor has a social consequence for not doing a good job, such as I met you, Nathan, through a real estate group. So when I do some work for you, I'm actually doing work for the entire group, because if a poor job is done, there's a sort of social connection there, which is a convoluted explanation for why an out-of-town fly-by-night contractor may be not as trustworthy as somebody that has a shared social circle with the client.
Yeah. So what kind of tips do you have then, just right off the bat, for selecting a contractor? Then how do I know if I'm picking a good contractor, Jake?
So having previous works attested to with photos, or if you can even get some addresses, so a good gallery, some good references, getting some eyes on the job site, check it, having, I guess, if there's negative comments that you've read online, because after somebody does work for 10,000 people, just by the law of large numbers, there may be a bad review that pops up. So seeing what are the two sides of that story, and was there a reasonable explanation? Because the part of why contractors can be defensive taking on certain jobs is because the client does hold a lot of power, both in terms of reputation, what are they going to tell other people, and they can kind of hold that over you, but also paying the money. There's, like with roofs, part of what makes it a more simple trade is that people aren't going to climb up on the roof and may not know all the particulars. But something I've heard from people that do kitchens and baths is that homeowners can be very particular running through all the various things. Oh, can we fix this? Can we fix that? Oh, well, don't you want to get paid? So a lot of it really does come down to knowing a guy.
Yeah.
And then,
it's so important.
Getting as educated as you can about the products and the install process, because so like on my end, I'd say, oh, well, we should do more flat roof training and this and that. And I say, wait a sec, I can go to conferences and I can research things online. Like, a lot of information is available online. So, the homeowner doesn't necessarily have to tell someone how to do their job, but if you can at least be familiar with all of the components that go into the job, or you can take a look at the local building codes. So like St. Louis County goes off to 2015 international building codes. I believe it's 2015. So there's a whole permitting portal that the county provides, where before getting my drywall done on the house I'm working on, I said, okay, if it's an unfinished garage, there's a certain drywall thickness that's going to be required. Well, if there's an inspection, well, the guy knows the inspector, so let me seek his expertise on there. But a big one really is being a client that is worth doing work for, which is reverse psychology, but we can only control what we control. So you can't control the fact that maybe there's a tough contractor out there, but if you're paying them the right way and you're being fair in the negotiations, that's at least the aspect you can control of bringing the best out of that person that's doing the work. That's what I see.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I see Josh Weisler. Weisler has joined us online. Hey, Josh, what's up, buddy? I appreciate you chiming into the conversation today. Josh is a good friend of mine, so I appreciate him supporting the show. All right. So, Jake, you mentioned something about, all of the different components that go into putting together an estimate for construction. And you talked about quality work. You also talked about scope a little bit. There's time and cost also associated with putting together a bid, how fast somebody wants something done, and then what are all the materials cost and the labor costs and all that in order to make that happen. Is this continuum? I've pulled this out of an old textbook that I had from my MBA classes where it talked about time, scope, and cost are the only ways to vary quality. What are some of your thoughts when it comes to this whole concept of time, costs, and scope in trying to accomplish affordable quality work for people when you're going to a roofing job?
Well, if we take them one at a time, scope, certain trades can be addressed quicker. So like roofs and gutters are measured pretty arithmetically in terms of, okay, there's always going to be gutter coil. There's always going to be shingles. A certain amount based on surface area, steepness, and length can be determined digitally, whereas siding can be a little more particular in terms of, okay, you have to set up the scaffolding. And so the time aspect specifically, the time that's tough to quantify can be how many days does a job site has to be visited. So you've got transportation, you have transportation of the materials, not just the delivery, because a lot of times those can be brought by a supplier, but also if there are components missing, there's time to go get them. And it's not just time, but it's a specific time, which is during the job site. So when people ask about crews, I'll say, one crew could do a better job for one company that's more organized and prepared, even if they're putting in the same effort, if they're not getting the materials delivered, or if they're not, if there's not a job site supervisor that's committed to getting the right material in a timely fashion to make the job go smoothly. That's a big thing, especially when because a good contractor is going to be relatively busy. So the time aspect, not just people think of the project timeline, but also the timing of everything being done. So a greater scope, I'd say there's more office, like a lot of claims will have, insurance claims will have a 20% overhead and profit added on there because materials sometimes have to be tested and sent to a facility to indicate whether there's a match. Some trades like siding takes longer than other ones. So on the contractor side, you can determine, okay, do we want to do them consecutively or get the roof done quickly because that's urgent, and then but then they're going to be waiting on the siding and windows because those are custom ordered. And then the can we pull up the continuum again?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the textbook, did they suggest that there are trade-offs between time, cost, and scope? Is that kind of what they were getting at?
Yeah, so they were saying that you can increase the scope to get more quality out of something, and when you increase the scope, you're going to either increase the time and increase the cost, or you can increase the cost and decrease the time, or you can increase the time and decrease the cost in order to achieve that specific scope. And they said the same thing about cost, time, in the textbook.
A good comparison with fitness is that the food, you can pick two of three. It can either be cheap, fast, and good. So if it's cheap and good, you're probably homemaking with raw ingredients. If it's cheap and fast, it's probably not good. It's a convenience store item. And then if it's good and fast, then it's not going to be cheap because it's going to be a specialty snack or a really high quality, piece of produce, for example. So I do kind of like those trade-offs with fitness. It could also be, you can either be really low body fat percentage, really high amount of muscle mass, or drug-free lifter. You can pick two of those. You can be big and drug-free, but it won't look the same. You can be drug-free and lean, but you won't be as big. Or you can be big and shredded, but then you're probably having a bit of juice.
Blame it on the juice. All right, I'm going to take a second and break away and thank our second sponsor here, Web Insurance. Let Web Insurance be your guide. They can review your current coverages and make sure you have the correct policies in place at the most affordable prices. And what their clients love is that every year they proactively shop your insurances to ensure you truly have the most affordable carrier with the most appropriate coverages. From contractor to real estate agent, for all of those who earn their income via 1099, let Web Insurance be your guide. They actually have recently acquired a health insurance company specifically for 1099 contractors. And so if you earn your money via 1099, I highly encourage you, if it's insurance at all, reach out to webinsurance.com and get a quote from them. Now back to our show. Appreciate you hanging in there with me, Jake, as we help the people who pay our bills. So I want to make sure that we're honorable of them. And our great guest, we're speaking with Big Jake Little, the Roof King. Jake works for K-Pro, and they are a roofing organization local here in St. Louis. And Jake is incredibly talented, not only in his integrity, but also in his commitment to excellence for the industry. And that's why we wanted to have him on the show. So Jake, I want to get back to this whole conversation. We were talking about time, quality, scope, costs, but ultimately what that comes down to is the finish of every product, right? Project. You're trying to get everything to the finish line of that scope within a time frame, trying to control costs. What does finishing a project look like to you? What does that mean?
Not stopping until the customer is happy within reason. So within reason, meaning there could be certain structural components that would increase the scope of work, such as a structural engineer, but within the, completing the job to a standard of reasonable quality and completing the cleanup as well. That's a big one. I've read a lot of negative reviews of roofing companies specifically, and a gentleman yesterday told me that he had nails. He was still finding nails from a roofing job 3 years ago. And this guy works in construction, but he just didn't happen to have a nail magnet in his garage. So that job, there was a missing piece of flashing against the brick. So that job is closed out, but in his eyes, it's not really finished.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, that's the same thing when it comes to property management and completing a turnover or renovation. Like the cleaning aspect, I don't know how many people mess this up. This is a major challenge in the property management industry, the real estate investor industry. You think you're going to show a property to a tenant that still has construction materials inside, or still has, like you're saying, nails on the ground, or doesn't have the piece of flashing finish. Like you have to finish the job and finish the work. And I find that it's so frustrating as a property manager who's taken over, hundreds, if not thousands of properties from other property managers that said that projects were complete and they were showing homes that just weren't ready. How do you ensure that your guys take a project all the way to the finish line?
We don't get a check until it's done. Like in an insurance job, there's a 2-check process. So cover the materials with the first check on the day of the roof completion, and then often they're waiting on additional money from the insurance company. And again, back to the negative reviews I've read, a lot of offices will just start invoicing people without having more of a warm reach out of, hey, just making sure we're happy with everything and that you're getting squared away with the insurance company, rather than sending intimidating notices in the mail and via email. So having a sort of warm invitation to close out the job rather than just like demanding the payment, because based on the bad contractor conversation we had earlier, it can be intimidating to get, letters in the mail, demanding payment and things like that. So I would say it goes back to being someone that's worth doing business with. Well, someone that's worth doing business with is someone that, cares about the whole experience that the customer has, beyond just did work, get paid.
Yeah, I love that. And Jake, one of the things I wanted to make sure that we talked about today was this whole concept of not only just having quality work done, but solving unique problems. There's so many times that in construction we see inconsistent standards or cost overruns. We see things like time delays or communication gaps, like you were just talking about. What are some ways that you can solve unique problems as an organization? What are some unique problems that you've solved in the past? How does that process look for you?
Well, here was actually a question that I had for you going in, which is a theory that I've been kicking around in my head, just having looked at a fair number of rental properties and being a part of the real estate group, just hearing from people's experiences. It seems to me that at least the biggest problems that a lot of real estate professionals in terms of real estate ownership are running into are, now of course tenant problems exist, but it seems to be like a lot of construction issues. Like they're just having trouble getting a hold of the challenges of the building itself. As that seemed, and of course I get called in for those problems. So to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But what do you think of that theory that the construction and like the building challenges is the main thing that's undermining profitability for folks from a property standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I find that construction has to be controlled. So a lot of times in property management, the real issue isn't that there's work to be done on buildings, because there's always work to be done. I mean, we do semi-annual inspections on all the buildings, and we identify all kinds of issues that need to be taken care of within the property, that are deferred maintenance, that weren't taken care of during renovation times. It's deferred maintenance that needs to be taken care of on the property. Not all deferred maintenance is weighed the same. Not everything needs to be done right now. For instance, you mentioned gutters early on the show and soffit and fascia. If your gutters and soffit and fascia aren't proper on the building, that can cause any number of water issues inside the building. So when you don't fix the gutter, soffit, and fascia, you might get damp drywall, which leads to mold. You might get water in the basement when those things aren't fixed properly. Additional damage to ceilings and cracking that happens throughout homes. You get squirrels and animals that get inside the unit that are additional maintenance costs. What I'm talking about is a lot of investors see the ramifications of not taking care of the actual problem. They're dealing with the squirrel issue, or they're dealing with the water in the basement issue, or they're dealing with the moldy drywall issue. But the real issue is the damage to the gutters and the soffit and the fascia. If their management company would just do a semi-annual inspection, they could catch those items, recommend those items be repaired, and not have both costly repairs that need to be done. You can catch those things before they become major issues to a building. So I think that if you're talking about rising maintenance costs, there's a strategy to reducing maintenance costs in the real estate industry, Jake, and then there's tactics,
They say do it right or do it twice. I was thinking about some houses in Chesterfield where it could be a $600,000 house, and yet the soffit and fascia are not cased with metal. And what does water do to wood? It deteriorates it. The gutters are fastened into wood. And so if there's not a proper drip edge on the roof or metal casing the fascia, the wood into which the fasteners are applied, the gutters start to sag down. And just because that person could afford the down payment and can keep up with the monthly payment of that house, even though they are in a larger income bracket, I've seen people don't necessarily have a better ability to afford adding the metal casings on those items. And so I think it almost comes down to what types of buildings are people taking on in the first place. So the conventional wisdom is to have an emergency fund for things that go wrong. Oh, the water heater goes out. Well, that to me is more of a game of whack-a-mole. It's okay waiting for something to fail versus, so like in the house that I purchased, I got one that was a little smaller than what my income potentially could have allowed. But I did that because I'm not interested in just solving all the problems that pop up. I want to make things in pristine condition. So you could look at, for example, there's a 1979 custom built that's on a Century Farm in South County. Families owned it since the 1890s. And there are Pella windows that, due to where they're arranged in the brick and with a nice overhang they have, you cannot tell that these windows are anything more than 10 years old, and they're actually from 1979 because it was built so perfectly the first time. And so the people just seem to be a little in over their heads on a lot of these houses. And then that goes back to the knowledge piece. People won't even understand what the soffit and the fascia are, much less that, how it interacts with, the roofing system or the drainage, or how an area, one of those being messed up can hurt the gutters, which then gets the foundation. And now you're dealing with mold. The most surprising thing that I have discovered in working in this industry is the air quality crisis. So post 2020, people became more aware of that, just given, disease spread as well as increased time inside. But there's some apartment buildings around here in South County that were built in the 70s. They're never cleaning the air ducts. So there's spores that are just flying everywhere. And the concentration of spores that are in the air makes it such that small amounts of moisture can lead to mold starting to grow.
I mean, Jake, you're touching on so much stuff. You're specifically referencing, like I said, strategies and tactics of why a lot of investors feel inflated costs within their building.
This right here is for getting into the attic. So I carry with me a flashlight, the respirator, and a disinfectant spray. And I've demoed 2 layers of insulation in the attic of the house that I bought. It's a 1950s, so it's lower slope. There's cat dander and things like that. Lee Ford says anything soft has got to come out. It's not anything soft unless it's in the attic, then it's okay. Nope, it all had to come out.
I love it. Let's take a second, Jake, and thank our third sponsor of the show, BBC Global Services. BBC Global is outsourcing that helps people like you focus on your superpowers. They're simple and on your terms with no term limits or minimum. If you need a virtual assistant, it's a big thing that's going on right now. Highly recommend you head on over to bbcglobalservices.com and talk with somebody. Get a free consultation with no obligation. Get a quote for somebody that helps you out. We personally at Red Maples use BBC Global Services. I personally use BBC Global Services for a virtual assistant that helps produce my podcast. And so I highly encourage you to head over to www.bbcglobalservices.com and check them out. All right, now back with Jake. So, Jake, we've been talking all about quality, but I think it's so important when you're doing construction that you ask yourself the question, what is it about me that an individual wants? What is it about me that makes an individual worth doing business about?
Close.
So what is it about you that makes you someone worth doing business with?
I actually brought a prop with me. So if you start reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, it's going to start with the letter A. I'm not reading every single article in there, but I'm touching the important ones. So here I'm all the way to AT. So we're into atmosphere. And that's going to be pretty important to know about if you're going to discuss storm damage with folks. And so in the same way that we can look at time, scope, and cost as a matrix of quality, people always talk about, their mind, body, and spirit. So I say, okay, how can I be the most educated individual in the field? So the Berkshire Hathaway Shareholders Conference with Warren Buffett, they sell John Mansville roofing materials, and they, manufacture fiberglass. So I spoke with a Denmark plant supervisor who used to work in the steel business. I talked to a guy who was brought into Tamco to work on their granule adhesion issues on their shingles. That gives me a more accurate assessment of the brands that I encounter when I'm stepping on the roof. Products that a lot of stuff is petroleum based. They need to be tested together in order for them to, for you to know to put those on the roof. Now, a lot of newer houses, you just tear off the shingles and then you have a manufacturer spec of how it gets done. But if you're solving problems in a unique way, it can be helpful to understand the chemical and physical properties of these items. So that's a little bit on the sort of knowledge side, just doing continuing education in a creative way. And as far as I know, no one else is reading the 1993 encyclopedia. I was born in 96, so it's a bit of a what did I miss? Physical. So we were talking before the show about the 3 juice protocol, the cranberry juice, the beet juice, and the cherry juice. So that relates to sleep, the iodine for the thyroid. So because I'm getting in shape with Jake, I've got a bunch of different tips and tricks of both the intake as well as in the musculoskeletal system. So that's going to the chiropractor and sitting on the rolling table and learning about, you know, the fascia of the muscles, the correct alignment of the spine, which is pretty critical given that you are risking your life every time you climb on a roof. So I want to make sure I'm bringing my absolute best physically that I can, given the demands. And then next week, I'm competing in the JD's Gym Spring Strongman Contest, and we'll be pushing cars, deadlifting cars, clean and pressing both a keg as well as a fat bar axle. So you got to do what's called the continental clean. If you're anybody but me, but because it's only 175 pounds, I'm able to just pop it right up because I've been working the grip. And so that is, you know, there is so much demand for our product. And after you get some experience, you know, you just get referrals like clockwork. So as a sales manager, I don't really have my guys practice like what's a closing line? How do you make the sale? It really is more so about how do you build transformational trust with these homeowners? How do you physically keep up with the demands of, you know, of the industry? And so those are the kind of things where, let's say that there's a new guy. We have one this year named Wesley who's been doing an amazing job. And so when I'm hyping Wesley up to get on these roofs, and this kind of taps into the spiritual aspect too, if we're talking mind, body, and spirit, is I'll encourage them. I'll say, what about you as an individual makes you someone worth doing business with? So what that does is it helps you step away from industry specific factors, such as how long have you been doing it, or how intelligent are you on the products and things like that. Okay, well, I'm honest, I'm energetic, I care for people. There's, you know, I have interests that align with this, you know, type of customer, or I'm open-minded enough to learn about unexpected things I may have in common with a customer that at first maybe I wasn't seeing eye to eye with. Like we did a job where a gentleman had been upset because it, you know, occasionally it can rain while you're doing the install. If you're doing, you know, a few hundred roofs a year, the clouds can sneak up on you. Weather can be unpredictable. And so we went from angry homeowner who's really concerned about the interior house to me helping out the company owner's dad on these drywall repairs and painting the ceiling. So I'm getting my hands dirty, and we gave him some farm fresh eggs. I cut my finger a bit, so he had given me a Band-Aid. And what we had uncovered in this process, because it was a hard roof to tarp, because there was some rolled roofing in the back. There was a flat area. And I said, Joe, let me show you a picture of the house I'm working on. It's also a 1950 with a wood burning stove and with some rolled roofing in the back. And I haven't even been able to get my roof done yet. But, you know, we come from different parts of town. We've got super different backgrounds, but we're actually out here working on the same kind of house and just trying to get through each day and, you know, make this place a little nicer than it was when we got it. And I looked at some of the historical sites. So then it goes back to the mind part, looked at some of the historical sites nearby his home. And I said, oh, there's the Gerot Mansion. It turns out there was a lot of French stuff in the economy here. And he said, oh, well, actually, I'm French. And so we went from what normally is the whack-a-mole mindset of how do we solve this install? How do we do this? And what was a very troubled situation ended up being, you know, the kind of guy that I'd like to invite to the housewarming party when I finish the job on mine. And so given that my dad was a pastor, or still is a pastor, the kind of open-mindedness to that kind of experience, that's something that can make me as an individual worth doing business with.
100%. Couldn't agree more, Jake. All right, I want to take a second and also say hi to James Masadi. I saw you online, giving us a like and a thumbs up on Facebook. Thank you for that. Heather, I want to say thank you for giving us a like and a comment on Facebook. You guys, your interaction's impeccable. If you have a question for Jake, make sure you put it in the comments, and we'll make sure it gets asked for the end of the show. But we do have a whole segment that I want to talk about now, Jake, with you. And that is, I know you've got a passion for history and, like you talked about, a spiritual side, mission. connecting your mission to something larger, comparing not to contemporaries, but historical standards. How do you embrace this mission concept and historical standards within construction?
So construction specifically, so the house that I bought, it's my first like full fixer upper, and I didn't want to get in over my head. It's a 1-bathroom house. It's got a relatively small kitchen, and the guy who had lived there evidently had 7 daughters that all were raised in the house. And if I've talked to a lot of people that grew up in Afton and South City in the mid 20th century, that are now, in the age where they'd be our clients now on the houses that are larger and further out in the county. So we went from 5 to 6 kids being in a small brick house to now people will have a very large suburban home that they're lower cost materials up front, but then if you have to redo everything, it ends up being a high absolute value of job cost. But if you look at like toilets per person in America, all these different things that we expect based on what we see around us, the majority of human existence hasn't had many of those things. So I find the historical standard is helpful because certain aspects of life in the past were more difficult. And so we know that the Homo sapien is capable of a lot more than what is required of us in the modern day. So, I'd like to work inside at a computer all day. Okay, well, my great-great-great-grandfather wasn't able to do that. He had to cross a river on a horse. And so let's say, you're walking groceries through the rain. At least I'm not crossing a river on a horse. Or with the 1 bathroom in the house. There's only 1 bathroom. Oh, wait, that's still 7 times more bathrooms per person than the previous folks that had lived here. And so where this relates to the sophistication and taste on the house is that's a kind of mental vehicle that you can use to be okay with having less square footage because, maybe a house in Crestwood or Afton doesn't have the same size as one that's newer out in the county, but it's really durable brick materials and it's going to cost me less over time. But I can get equal enjoyment out of the high quality that maybe somebody else might out of the larger size of a different house. And because people are always chasing the big one, that's what's getting them overextended on the budget. In fitness, I have great grandparents that lived 100 years that would eat full fat butter. They even would have a little alcohol every day, but they were like eating real food. And so when you take the historical perspective on food, it gives you a better idea of, what food were humans really designed to eat? And what are the shortfalls that I see in today's available foods, even though it's sort of what everybody else is eating and it seems to work well. Well, what's my actual potential? Or with the gym, here's another one, is Arnold Schwarzenegger and Joe Weider in the 1960s and 70s to work on the chest became very popular. Well, the bench that's used for a modern bench press had to be invented. And so if you look at the Olympic lifts, both type of lifts conclude with the weight being held overhead. And so historically people have practiced that one more. And well, in my opinion, that's conducive to a more well-rounded strength, as well as like a better posture and alignment of the spine. So if you look at some of the old school lifts that people would do, or this couple where we're doing their farm roof over in South County, they said they used to go through 4 gallons of milk a week. And I said, was that when your kids were in the house? And they said, no, that was us too. We would drink 4 gallons of milk a week. And they're super sharp and doing really well. And the guy, he's got really big hands and forearms. Well, I've learned recently after a home gym conference, I was in a grip competition and I met a world record holder that has weight class and just overall world records on certain grip events. He used to be a physical therapist and he makes the stuff and sells it. All these different little muscles in his hands and fingers have grown over time. Well, if you're stuck in a gym just doing 3 sets at 10 on the machines and the free weights, there's a whole world of underground fitness knowledge that they're missing out on.
Yeah. So what is then your mission? Because I know we've talked, a lot about the historical aspects of and how you tie those in and relate those to looking at modern day construction. But ultimately, I mean, you're a fitness buff. You love, helping solve construction problems. You're an avid reader. What is the overall mission? What's your purpose? What brought you to this decision to be sold out and just take roofing to the level that you have?
So it is the base. If you look at the simple machines, a very simple one is the lever. And in personal training, part of why I'd like to do it why I do it for free is just because if it just kind of weighs on it mentally, if you're being paid for it, feels like something you have to do, is there's not really a lot of leverage because, okay, 1 hour of my time, certain amount of funding, whereas there's a nearly unlimited amount of roofing that can be sold and then completed by crews that are trained to get through these jobs really quickly. And so just the fact that the potential exists, and I'd say some of it could just be genetic. Some people are just hardworking by nature, and then the more I kind of optimize my routine and get more mental clarity, you just naturally are going to shoot for big things. And then it goes to the historical standard. I'll read about, or no, here's a big one. The Biltmore Estate. Are you familiar with the largest private home in America? The Vanderbilt home. So it is a home so large that they had to build a railroad in order to deliver the materials. Even the richest billionaire would have trouble replicating the scale of this job. So that's something I also like with historical things is what was something that was completed in the past, but that would be impossible to do now. Things like the pyramids. You just stand there, you say, how did they even do this? Same thing with the Biltmore. Well, the guy who built that was 26 years old. And it's got absolute sophistication and taste in terms of the artwork, the wallpaper, and things like that. And so when I was there, and I was 26 when I got my first house, and I was there at about 25, I said, wow, this is unbelievable. And a little idea I've been kicking around is, just given how well the Jake from State Farm thing is going, how could I get it to where I'm doing, $5 million or $10 million in a single year so that just more in life would be possible and you become someone that's worth listening to, not just because you're the silly goose on the loose for a nice speech or for the podcast, but something that's truly impressive and astonishing. And a lot of people have said that they'd like to see me run for president someday. And I think if you put me on the CNN debate stage, even like, let's say I'm up there against Trump, I'd say, yeah, this guy's a great insult comic, but how we do one thing is how we do everything. And we're going to get America back in shape. And if you're going to do that without the influence of big money or whatever concession somebody has to make, you got to have a pretty unbelievable message. And I think that would be a cool thing to do if I'm ever getting bored, when I'm in my 40s or 50s. I think we can motivate a lot of, it's not necessarily about winning the election, things like that, but it really would motivate a lot of people to kind of get their house in order a bit in a way that society just can't do for you.
Well, you heard it first on my show, guys. Get America back in shape. That's the slogan for Big Jake from K-Pro Roofing. So appreciate all the time that we've spent together, Jake. We're coming up on our time for today. I want to take a quick second and just share with the audience here my book again, my new book. If you want to get this new book and learn how I've grown my organization from, just under a couple units to over, a little over 200 units in just a short period of time, under a year's time frame, you got to go get this book, guys. I've been talking about the Caesar method for a long time for anybody those are in my personal circle, but now it's in the public atmosphere. And you guys can use the tools, techniques, and tips. I took a healthcare organization, medical device organization, from 2 million to over 20 million in revenue in just under 4 years. I used the principles from this book. And if you don't want to pay full price for it on Amazon, just DM me the word Caesar or put it in the comments, and I'll make sure I'll reach out to you and I'll get you a copy of the book for significantly less than what you'd pay on Amazon. I just want to make sure that I get it out to as many people as possible. And with that said, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you that the whole reason this podcast exists is because of Red Maples. That is your go-to source for institutional style property management of small multifamily rentals. I highly encourage you to go over to red-maples.com and check out the /assessment and get an assessment done of your rental portfolio up there on the screen. You guys can see all the steps that we take and do. And that, Renovation Nation, brings us to the end of another episode. I am your host, Nathan Bush. And I appreciate you joining me on this journey of real estate business growth. Remember, just like plants need the right air, soil, and care, our minds need the right environment to build a life of purpose, passion, and growth. Don't forget to get your citizenship to Mind Renovation Nation. You follow us on YouTube. You go over and subscribe to the email list. And then you share the show. When you share the show, it lets everybody else know that we do this every Friday at noon. So join me next time for a little more insights and inspiration, and of course, a little bit of that nation building spirit that drives us all to create a community united by shared values, purpose, and a commitment to leaving a lasting legacy. I'd like to take a second, too, and thank my guest, Jake. Thank you, Jake, for being a part of the show. I couldn't have made this show possible without you and the audience, so thank you very much for being here, buddy.
You, sir, are an individual worth doing business with.
Thank you. You too. I totally agree with that. Let's finish up here by letting you guys know, until next time, I want to make sure that you guys keep building, keep growing, and let's lead more than 25,000 souls to a life of values-based investing. In our journey of Mind Renovation Nation, we often talk about personal growth, ethical leadership, and making impactful choices. Values-based investing is an extension of that philosophy. It's about being a steward not only of our finances, but of our values and vision for the future. Signing off from the heart of St. Louis, stay blessed, stay inspired, and remember, every day is a chance to renovate your nation. Thanks, guys.